Welcome to another edition of In Conversation. And today we have another special guest. We're always having special guests here, and today's guest is another special one, and that's none other than Chris P. James from the Burrito Brothers. Welcome.
Hello, glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you on the show for sure. So you guys got a new album that came out near the end of last year, it looks like. Uh,
Yeah,
Together. That's
yes.
the name of the album. I really love the futuristic cover there. It just seems
Oh,
like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's unique, kind of far out there. It's
We got the mothership here, which is has got the lady, the picture from Sweetheart of the Rodeo by the Byrds, because that album and the Byrds as a group were the mothership. That's the origins of the original Flying Burrito Brothers, and so we're kind of playing on that, and we turned that shack from the Gilded Palace of Sin into a landing module.
so was that by design a lot of the ideas with this
Yeah,
album,
we were
the way you
talking
set it up?
about yeah, we were talking about wanting to kind of make it an idea of out in space. For some reason, I felt like we'd done enough different ideas, and we just kind of throw out what we might use as some cover art the next time. And I thought it might be pretty fun to have space exploration. I was kind of reminded of the album, speaking of the Byrds, that the next one that group made after Graham Parsons and Chris Hillman left, after Sweetheart of the Rodeo, was called Dr. Birds and Mr. Hyde. And on it, they had this motif on the back cover of guys, the Byrds, the group landed in space suits, and then they were taking them off, and they wind up wearing cowboy hats and western wear, and they ride off into the sunset and horse. So it's sort of thematically the idea of blending country sensibilities with something very, very modern.
So how do you go about designing the cover? Did somebody work on it inside the band, or somebody you knew, or?
Yeah, we've got a guy who has been the art guy for quite a while. I used to work in journalism in a magazine called Shake Magazine, and the art director and design of it was a guy named Warren Ells, and he's been making our album covers. He's very good at it. Although I should point out, really, this one was triggered by this picture here, which was uh, the first stab at this wild idea of putting the group into a strange landing module based
Mhm.
on that shack from the Joshua Tree Desert, and that was made by Joe Boiling, who is Bob Boiling's wife. And Bob Boiling is our representative in England and our European representative. And he's been really essential to this group's advancement or whatever. And she's an artist, and she flattered us no end by wanting and offering to paint that painting. That's not graphic arts like so many, like the front cover is. Um, this was an actual oil painting. I believe it was oil on canvas. And I
Hmm.
remember seeing it in stages. She and Joe and Bob sent me attachments of what it looked like, and so she took this concept of space flight for the burritos and made it into this, which we initially thought might be the cover art, but then she wasn't happy with the idea of uh, putting uh, putting this craft. What we wanted to do, we wanted to take this craft and have this picture be coming from it, and she really preferred, understandably so, having her picture left as a standalone picture, and we ended up choosing to do it in this way where her picture is used in the back cover, and that was fine with her. And I'm so glad, because I hated the idea of in any way insulting or stepping on her toes after she'd been so kind as to paint that for us.
Yeah, it definitely came out really, really good. I really love the
Great, it's
cover and
good
the way
visual.
the whole package. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, now that we've got the album cover and stuff talked about, let's dig into the meat and potatoes here. So,
Okay.
how did you guys come together to get the album all made? How long far back did you start the recording process on this one?
Well, pretty far back. This one was something of a slow mover, and there's some really major reasons why. One being that the pandemic came on right around the time we had finished our last album, the Notorious Burrito Brothers. And as always, once we finish one album, we're already beginning to think about where we want to go next musically. We just love recording and making our next album, so to speak. And that was right when the pandemic hit. And then, even worse than that, if it's possible to be worse than that, was the fact that our guitar player, Bob Hatter, was battling cancer. He had been a survivor, and we thought he survived cancer something like 7 or 8 years prior, but it returned as it so often does on people, and he lost that battle. It was probably about a year and a half that he was getting the chemo and fading and then essentially dying, to put it bluntly. And we had already exchanged ideas and gotten together a little bit, although once the pandemic hit, Bob was not into having visitors or anything because the resistance is so low when you're getting the
Hmm.
chemo and you're fighting cancer. And the pandemic was such a big factor. And so it just almost erased our ability to get together with Bob. But we talked with him on the phone, and we had already made demos of almost all the songs we were going to do, and and just squared away how this album was going to go while we still had Bob to discuss it with. And at one point, the other two guys in the band, besides Bob Hatter and me, are Tony Paoletta, the steel player, who's just magnificent. He's a world class player. And also world class is Peter Young, the drummer, who's not only a drummer, he's a fine, fine singer, very good on harmonies and lead, and the engineer for almost everything except the initial tracking because he's playing a drum set. But then once we begin our overdubs and such, Pete is at the engineer's chair. So it's a really nice, solid, cohesive, tight four guys. And we like it that way. It's a real good chemistry, uh,
Hmm.
so that we don't have the old too many chefs spoil the brew, the broth, whatever it was. But as we began to realize we weren't going to get to make it with Bob, we weren't going to get to track the masters. Tony suggested we contact our longtime friend Steve Allen, who is excellent, superb guitar player with lots of credits. And Steve replied, he said that he would be okay with doing it if he had Bob's blessing, if Bob was okay with it. And Bob was. Bob wanted the album to go ahead and get made. And we all agreed that it would be nice to uh, credit Bob as still being the guitar player in the band. And then Steve Allen, who essentially became the new guy in for Bob's
Right.
departure, was listed this time around as an extra special guest. But so all that really slowed down the process.
Hmm.
And then even more so, I threw a real screw in the works. I got wildly interested in making a Christmas album last year. We started in January. It was like right on the heels of still being in the previous year's Christmas spirit, and thought, if we get started on this, you got to have a Christmas album done by the summer so that it can get designed and mixed and everything, so to be out in time for that year's Christmas. You can't
Hmm.
just do it around Christmas time. And, so somewhere around August of last year, we had completed this Christmas album, and I was high on the idea of putting it out because that would be something unusual, something different. The Burrito Brothers have never made a Christmas album, and with such a feeling that we're always kind of under the radar, I'm into anything we can do to try to raise a few eyebrows and see if we could get a little more attention. And I begged our record company in England, SFM Records, to put the Christmas album out, and let's just hold up on our Together album that we essentially completed both right around the same time.
Hmm.
And he had the guy who operates SFM, Brian Adams, and his partner, uh, Robin Sellers, they had just released. So it was an awkward request, but I thought, I don't think, if we pull this a week or so after it was released and just wait on it and then deal with it once 2024 comes around and regard it as our new release, I don't see how that's really a problem. It's not requiring a certain point in time to be released like a Christmas album. And it's still new. Of course it's new to everyone. They haven't heard it. So that's what we did. It's kind of confusing that it was released in 2023, some months back, but not really. It was just immediately held up so that we would do what we're doing now, promote it once this year came around, and it's our new album. And I don't really see. I think of it that way. It's too good to have just left behind.
Mm-hmm. So how did you guys all come up with the songwriting? You guys work together on it? Do you all bring songs into the mix and go from there? How do you?
Um, we do most definitely work together on it, and we do all bring songs into the mix. But I have the lion's share. I'm sort of relied upon, and it's very nice. I mean, nobody, uh, I can tell, it's not some sort of strong arm leadership. It's that they support most of my ideas, and when they don't like them, I don't have any problem with that. And I've got lots of song ideas, having recorded demos or tried to make it, so to speak, ever since I was out of college, young adult. And so there's a huge backlog of available material that I can draw from. And what we do usually is about a half of what we come up with starts with something like those that we just fix up. We turn them from a rougher demo I made sometime back in my life into a more completed full song, which is handy because when we get together to get a song together like that, we're not just wondering where to start. We got a good little starting point, and then we just fix it up, change a lot of words, change parts, and make it the best song we can make. But having some raw material to start with is really handy. Although every time there's always a couple songs that just started then and there that we just happened, like Tony came up with that country song, Blood on His Hands, and we all joined in helping write that. And luckily I was able to talk him into singing it because he really wanted to defer to me regarding me as the group's lead singer. And I just thought, no, it's really nice to have that broken up here and there. And he's fine as a singer on that country song. There's also a song that Peter Young sings lead on, The Streets of Santa Rosa, which in fact was the last song Bob Hatter wrote. He and Peter wrote that song together. And it sure seemed appropriate to me for Peter to be the lead singer of it. And he does a splendid job of it.
Do you have any personal favorites on the album yourself?
I do. My favorite is I Live for Loving You. It's the second to last song on the album.
Yep.
And the reason for that being my favorite is the wish, the dream, the high hopes that it might get some legs, that it might go farther. I've always dreamed of the idea of writing a standard, a song that any really good singer could sink their teeth into, the kind of thing that gets put into movies. Like Dolly Parton's "I Will Always Love You" is a premium example of such a song, and I don't intend to sound egotistical or flattering myself to claim that this song is quite that, but that was the desire. That's
Hmm.
the target I was aiming at. And I think it really is a very nice song, a sweet, tender, very melodic, soulful love song. And so therefore it's dear to my heart. I like it a lot.
Yeah, definitely one of the ones I would recommend listening to on the album. Tell us about Mr. Customs Man. How did that one come about?
Oh, that's a good story. That was something that we have as the Burrito Brothers, part of gosh, I was going to say formula, which is usually considered a bad word, but the recipe or something that we've now for 4 or 5 albums always had a Graham Parsons lyric that's newly made into a song. Graham had a lot of lyrics left behind. I knew his best friend, his the guy he started the International Submarine Band with, John Nuis. I was good friends with him back some years back, 15, 20 years ago. He's been deceased pretty long now. Um, and he had a notebook of Graham's in his possession, and it contained, amongst little snippets of this and that, uh, some fully realized lyrics. And there's some other sources of that too. In fact, on our the album Sound as Ever that we made back in 2010, Walter Egan had a sheet of lyrics from Graham Parsons that Emmylou Harris gave to him and said that Graham wanted him to have it. And they were hoping that they would finish that song together, but Graham died before Walter saw him again. And of course, Walter knew Graham and is the author of Hearts on Fire, which is on Graham's last album. So there was quite a connection there. And so we followed up with that concept. Though these lyrics were not personally given to us by Graham, we are the group who's following the whole legacy of the group he started way back in 1969.
Mm.
Who better to be doing quote new Graham Parsons songs? And so Mr. Customs Man is that. It's one of those Graham Parsons lyrics. And to take it a step further, Bob Hatter and I were the ones who put the music to that. And we were fooling around with, I had this idea. I heard this jam, I guess it was, on a bootleg of Quicksilver Messenger Service from 1968. And those guys rocked. Those guys were a really good band, that early 4-piece QMS. And we kind of took the basic idea of something they were doing that was never released because it had a cool groove to it. Of course, once we started applying Graham's lyrics to it and sort of writing the new song, it changed. It morphed into something slightly different, but that was our starting point. And Customs Man is like Arlo Guthrie
Mm.
coming into Los Angeles, asking the customs man at the airport
Mm.
to leave him alone, quit bugging him just because he's a long-haired hippie in flashy clothes, which is pretty dated. I mean
Yeah,
that sounds like a lyric from 50 years ago, but
yeah,
I got no problem with that. That's kind of who we are too.
yeah. All right. So let's ask you about one more song here because this one's a little unique and it's the longest song on the album,
Oh
obviously,
yeah.
and it's the one that closes it out, History Suite. Take us through that song.
Oh yeah. That's uh that's pretty special because I believe it worked, and we had high hopes. That's that desire to truly be artistic and creative, to come up with a extended suite of music. It's 16 minutes long, I believe, maybe just shy of that, and it's not at all something like 16 minutes of noodling or jamming. It's a tightly organized, cohesive piece of one section leading to the next, to the next, to the next. The closest model, that we're probably sort of copying in concept would be side two of Abbey Road by the Beatles. It's song after song after song, and none of them are long enough, really, that they asked to be standalone songs. They all fit nicely into this little musical journey. And we also included in one little section voiceovers of people like Chris Etheridge speaks on there. There you can hear Graham Parsons' voice say a few things on there, and it was just a really neat to put that together and then feel that we did right, that it really did work. Because our desire is to be a artistic, creative. I almost even like the word progressive rock uh, applied to our intentions. This is not at all. The Burrito Brothers are not a country band. They're certainly always should be some sense of that flavor,
Hmm.
but from the get-go, even when they seemed real country, they were always marketed to rock. It was hippie country rock. Back when they started, there was a lot of that. There was Grateful Dead was doing it, New Riders, Poco, Burrito Brothers, obviously, Pure Prairie League. Gosh, the list goes on and on and on. Mike Nesmith, so much. The Eagles, when they started, were clearly a country rock group. But all of these groups were marketed as rock. They weren't on the country charts. So that legacy, that flavor is how we want to be perceived ourselves. We're more of a rock band than a country band.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. A lot of these songs, although some of them have that little bit of that flavor in them,
Oh yeah,
it's
hopefully, yeah.
most of them rock have that more rock so than country in
Yeah.
estimation, in different parts of the catalog is, it's a little different, but I like how you guys it seems like from what I can see, it seems like more closer now to the original part of the band per se, as far as the way the music is.
Boy, I like to think so. I believe so. I think when we energized, when we reconstituted the band in 2010 or right around there, 2009,
Mhm.
our strong motive was to make it sound more like it returned to the original roots. We didn't want to be a copy of that. We wanted to still be sort of forward looking, but it did seem as though it strayed farther than we wanted to wanted it to be. When the band moved from LA to Nashville in 1980, they had a uh, record deal with the label Curb Records, and they were trying to be on the country charts. Now, given that time, uh, there was a lot more, dare I say, integrity or something. That the
Mm.
groups like Foster and Lloyd and the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band and Vince Gill, and there's a lot of really good, memorable stuff on the country charts right around there. So it wasn't that out of character for the Burrito Brothers to chase that dream. But it was different from where they started. The original group was not as I said, they were marketed to hippies and to rock. So moving to Nashville and chasing the country charts was a pretty big change. And they they had a little bit of success at that, but not a lot, and then sort of returned after some personnel changes and stuff to something closer to the old idea. But it did feel to us like they still kind of sounded more like a country band than a
Mm.
rock band, and we kind of wanted it to return the other way around.
Yeah, it's interesting how you say that because back around that early '80s, there with the Curb experience, I was thinking a perfect example was Eddie Rabbit. He was on
Yeah,
Curb, and he had that rock element to him, but he was always on the country charts.
yeah, yeah.
So it's
I've heard it said, oh, and Rodney Crowell and Emmylou Harris had her success along the solo success. I've heard it called, I don't remember who it's attributed to, the Great Credibility Scare.
yeah. It's interesting. I mean, this is one of the few bands who, they're still fault the names, the way that band has changed the names throughout the years, the way they were credited on the albums. It's
Yeah,
interesting how they changed the names throughout the years, and
and yet it's always
yeah.
regarded as just the next version of the same band. I love that because that makes it possible for us to truly hold on to the legacy and believe in it. Um, if you go to Wikipedia and look up the Flying Burrito Brothers, you get
Hmm.
that very initial first stuff by Graham Parsons, Chris Hillman, Chris Etheridge, and Sneaky Pete. And then it follows the whole progression. And when they moved to Nashville in 80, they shortened the name to just the Burrito Brothers, which personally I like. I think I like just the shorter, sweeter name. Plus, I love the name beginning with B. As Roger McGuinn once said long, long ago, that he wanted the Birds to begin with B because of the Beatles and
Mm,
the Beach Boys. And I kind of think in those days, I think of where the records are going to be cataloged and in the store. And so B seems a little magical. And I think that's even been enforced stronger in some subsequent years with things like the band and the
mm,
Bee Gees. There's it's so
yeah.
I mean, that's not my sole reason. I kind of think like Curb probably thought at the time that the Burrito Brothers is just kind of tighter. And truthfully, even when they were the Flying Burrito Brothers, they always were also just referred to as the Burrito Brothers and sometimes even the Burritos. So then by the turn of the millennium, turn of the century, the group was called Burrito Deluxe, which was also the name of the second Flying Burrito Brothers album. And ostensibly they did that because they were trying to make it a little bit of different distance so that the curmudgeon people who said, well, you don't have the real guy, you're not the real Burrito, that's there's always been somebody saying that since 1973 when Rick Roberts led the first version of Flying Burrito Brothers that didn't have original members. There's always been somebody claiming, well, you're not the real ones. So they kind of caved to that a little bit and said, well, so we won't really go by that name. We'll go by Burrito Deluxe. And when they, after 8 or 9 years, decided to kind of close up shop, as usual, there's a record label getting in
Mm,
touch with whoever's still interested, whoever remnants of the last lineup want to reconstitute it. And I jumped at that chance. It was a dream come true. And they wanted it to be the Burrito Brothers. They weren't crazy about the name Burrito Deluxe. And they said also, we're not going to do it unless you can acquire the trademark rights to that name, which I had never done before, but turned out not to be hard.
mm,
So I got the trademark rights to the Burrito Brothers, and we were off and carrying on.
yeah.
And all of those are seen on Wikipedia as just that's just the name of different variations of the same group. It's all under the same heading. It's not treated as each little subtle name difference is some other group. It's treated under the same progression, the same legacy.
Yeah, I don't know any other bands that really do it like that. Because even when
I don't either.
Jefferson Starship and Jefferson Airplane, they are listed as two separate bands all the way
Yeah,
around.
yeah. I think one thing that lends itself to this is that, and I don't know of any other band this applies to. This group always has changed people. It's part of its dynamic. It's
Mm,
bizarre.
yeah.
There wasn't a original group that had a run. By the second album, there already were two different guys and one guy gone. By the third album, again. By the fourth album, again. There's no two albums in a row with the same personnel. By the fifth album, Rick Roberts is leading a group consisting of Country Gazette and a couple other guys that's fulfilling contracts and making another album as the Flying Burrito Brothers. And there's not even one of the four guys who was on that first album 3.5, 4 years prior. And when Graham Parsons was asked about it, he was fine with it. He said that quote, "We love, I think it's got to go on. The idea's got to keep going, whether I do it or anybody else does it. It's got to keep going."
Yeah.
So the beauty of that is every time it's reconstituted, which is over and over every time there's an album almost, uh, the everybody has to step up to the plate and deliver. It's like they got to show that, here's why we've taken this on and choose to continue, because it's a worthwhile legacy and we believe we can add something to the history. And it's a beautiful thing. It really keeps it fresh and alive.
Yeah. Speaking of history, you've had a long history there with Tony and Pete prior to this band.
Oh yeah.
Just take us through like how you guys all met and started playing together and all that, and way back whenever that
Well, let's
was.
see. I hit it off real good with Bob Hatter sometime, gosh, probably in the mid to late 80s. And we realized that we were huge fans of the Birds. He calls Roger McGuinn the master. And
Mm,
Bob, more than anybody I'd ever met in my life, could emulate that, really understood the electric 12-string guitar. In fact, it's pretty neat. We went to a show, a solo Roger McGuinn show at Zany's one night, and Bob got him to sign his electric 12-string. And we just got to talking about how cool it would be to do a session. I knew a guy who would let me record in his studio for a spec, and we were talking about just acting as if we were the Birds. We were going to make Birds music, but not copies. We were going to come up with our own material or songs of our choice, like Haunts of Ancient Peace by Van Morrison, for a fine example, and uh, and record them as if we're the Birds. I was putting on a voice. In fact, now when I hear it back, I wouldn't say I don't like it at all. I think it was very effective, but I can hear myself doing mimicry. I was kind of doing that Tom Petty-ish version of Roger McGuinn singing,
mm,
sort of punky country rock, uh, and they all loved it because I was able to do that, and we all loved it because Bob was able to do the 12-string, and then Rick Lano came on board and sang wonderful harmonies and played perfect drums, and we the we got a record deal doing it. It's like it was weird. Once we got this underway, we realized, well, it started out as an idea of being a copy of the Birds, and I'm sure anybody with knowledge of the Birds and good ears could hear that, but it isn't necessarily a copy. It became its own thing, and we got a record deal with Taxum Records. And I remember Al Perkins. I was so flattered. Al Perkins called me up and said he thought "Haunts of Ancient Peace," which is the first song on the album, written by Van Morrison, was just stellar. And my oh my, what a wonderful compliment that was.
mm.
And so Bob and I hit it off to that good degree, and we just stayed friends from then on. We did things like the Lost Sideshow, which was a fun little now and then gig with Mike Webb and Rick Lana, where we acted like we were the Doors, uh, and believe it or not, I was the Jim Morrison guy out front. And that was more fun than you can imagine. You had to be there to get it. But we we did various other things. We stayed in that Mr. Hyde group for a while, and then so when the time finally came that my brother Fred bowed out of the being in the Burrito Brothers, that was my chance to get Bob in. I met both Tony and Pete through Bob. Bob had an office on Music Row for years, almost as long as I can remember. And his partner in it was Peter Young, our drummer. And,
Mm.
and Peter, because he's such an engineer and a studio whiz, always had a good recording studio there in that office, even though it was small. And Tony being such a good friend of Bob's and so unbelievably brilliant on pedal steel was always first call for that instrument. And so just through the years, we got more and more acquainted with each other and more friends. We play on each other's sessions and things. And so, yeah, we've known each other a very long time. And in fact, that sort of organic way of personnel in the band has always been true of the Burrito Brothers. There's never been a audition. It's always
Mm.
been when one of these changes took place, whoever's still in the group and desiring to keep moving forward knows who to call, knows a good choice of person, because we're all sort of guys who've been around and on the scene. It always was that. I think you could make a strong case for that being what it was in the very first place, because the Flying Burrito Brothers originally a year before the Gilded Palace of Sin was just a bar band playing around LA that could have any number of different people sitting in, like Leon Russell or Jesse Ed Davis or Delaney Bramlett, of course, Graham Parsons. It was headed up by Barry Tashin and Ian Dunlop, who came up with the silly name. And Graham, a year later, decided when he and Chris Hillman left the Birds that he wanted to call the group the Flying Burrito Brothers, and he laughingly said he stole it from his buddy Ian. So it's kind of always been made up of the guys on the scene, the guys around. Nashville's quite a musician community.
Yeah. Now, have you always been based in Nashville?
I have, well, I guess I tried a year in LA, but the Burrito Brothers moved to Nashville in 1980. They were a Southern California, that it was
Mhm.
LA that Graham Parsons and Chris Hillman started the band. So it changed to Nashville in 1980. And then there's some examples. There's a few little glitches on the radar of the history of the Burrito Brothers where different people started it up once again in LA for a little while. I think there's at least two examples of there being two versions of the group, that there was the Nashville version and the LA version going at the same time when neither of them were really high up on the radar, which of course is kind of the history of the group all along. I always wish we could get more recognition because I just know the group is deserving of it and it makes really good albums. But it seems to be the fate to be somewhat under the general public's radar.
Yeah. So, when was the last time you guys were able to play like a live show?
Last November, I think it was the 50th anniversary of Graham Parsons' death. It was a tribute in Nashville to Graham Parsons, and we headlined that. And we do that kind of thing when they come up. I mean, we owe so much. I certainly feel like I owe so much to the memory and the legacy of Graham Parsons that whenever there's a tribute to him, I'm happy to be on board. And we we play scattered gigs that pop up. We're not really looking to do an intensive tour because, like I say, not being a mega star band, we don't command huge dollars, and yet we're comprised of guys who work a lot in Nashville, and so with all their session contacts and different things they're able to do, it's not really cost effective to climb into a van and plus at our age to go traipsing around. So we like to just do cool individual things. If we can get a
Hmm.
weekend here and there at a nice house, nice concert venue, or I've often thought it'd be really sweet to be the opening act for a band that really is super famous. That'd be quite a boost. Uh, and we're very interested in going over to Europe because our label is in Europe, and there's quite the precedent in the history of the Burrito Brothers of being well received in England and Europe. And so that's where our thoughts are. And usually right after, like right now, when an album is being promoted and newly released,
Hmm.
a few nice things start popping up, start coming in. And when they do, we put them on our website.
Yeah, I think with this new album, you know, I don't know what kind of, where your people are going to be able to hear it. I mean, radio nowadays is a whole different bird than it
Yeah.
was back then. Unfortunately, it's just that there's a lot of bands like in your situation where, how do you get the airplay out there? It's tough. It's tough because nowadays it's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of why what I was thinking with the idea of opening for some. Imagine opening
Yeah.
for Rolling Stones. That would be a life changer. I sadly fear that Keith Richard isn't even aware that the Burrito Brothers are still going. Um, uh, but I just feel in my heart that if he heard us, he'd like us because he was such a
Yeah.
fan and friend of Graham Parsons, and I think we're very true to that whole spirit and legacy. But that's kind of a pipe dream, and they're getting pretty darn up in the years where it might not be even remotely possible before long. But it always seems possible that some little nice shot in the arm, like I mentioned, my dream of something more happening for the song "I Live for Loving You." If that
Yeah.
wound up in a movie, that could change our fortunes pretty nicely. But I should also make sure and say when I'm talking about this kind of thing that I'm not all discouraged and disappointed and upset that we're not getting more recognition, because it's not a bad thing to be in this band. It's really a nice outlet for a lot of creativity. We make these albums, they're well received,
Hmm.
and they're out there in the world. You could do a lot worse than my lot in life, and so I'm not complaining.
Yeah. No, it's just a shame when a real decent album gets released though, and a lot of people just don't know about it, and
I know you wish you could. Yeah, you wish you could.
that's the hard part,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
In the old days when records did sell a lot more and stuff like that, it's like I would say like mid to late 80s, a lot of these record companies just dropped the ball on promoting them properly
Yeah,
on a lot of these type of, art albums that got lost back then. But nowadays, there's a lot of different, there's still labels out there. Then people are making their own thing and doing their
yeah.
own thing on YouTube and the American Idol folks and all this other stuff out there. There's just so many different ways you can promote your music. But
We're definitely making albums. We're
yeah,
still we hold on to that ethic from the 70s and maybe a little beyond there, where the album was the template, the creative piece of work that was presented to the world far more than the hit single. It's returned to individual songs very
yeah,
much so nowadays, and it was before. But when the Burrito Brothers first started, it was the album era. There were a lot of, probably you could make a case for the biggest groups in the world didn't even have big top 40 hits. They had albums like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and a number of others that they weren't single based, they were album based. And even, people could say that that's not how things are going now, so we're behind the times, but I don't agree. I think that to stand by what you believe is a worthwhile way to go about it is a form of integrity, and it's how we look at it. We stand by the concept that an album with its cover art and its interesting notes and its way that it uh, proceeds from start to finish as a cohesive unit is a very valid form of musical art. In fact, I contend far more so than just throwing individual songs out there.
mm,
It's something special about it.
yeah. And there's a lot of bands out there that are doing the opposite now because they just feel the album just it's not feasible for them to make an album. Sometimes, it all depends on situation. but
Yeah,
it's you see people shying away from that. But in your case, at least we've got somebody here that's going to keep making albums.
yeah.
That's a good thing.
I'm glad you say that because I think yeah, it takes all to you know. I mean, it's a ethic worth keeping around, and there should always be somebody who's still holding on to that idea. You know, everybody isn't the same.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're glad to have the chance to talk to you about this new album and everything. Was there any last thing you
Thank
want
you.
to add about the album or any other projects
Well,
you're working on or anything?
uh, as usual, we're already beginning work on our next album, and I'm pretty sure, I guess since it's a whiles away before it's done, it could change, but we're intending to call it Time Machine.
Mm,
That's indicative of what the group is, you know, it carries over from long ago, but also is of today. And and we can have that little shack logo signature thing be the time machine in much the same way that Doctor Who's telephone booth thing, you know. So we even kind of visualize the cover. And then other than that, I like to mention invite people to please go check out our website, theburritobrothers.net. And we've got a lot of videos on it. There's different uh, albums that are available only on it. There's the Sidelines series, and in fact, we didn't mention, we put together a 2 disc version of the new album of Together
mm,
that's called Together Deluxe, and it has a second disc of curiosities of demos and outtakes and live things that just add to the sort of a peek behind the scenes of the main album. The disc one is Together, and also on the website is the timeline, which is really cool. If you're interested at all in the history of the Burrito Brothers, you can see with an entry for every year since 1968 how the band transformed, how it evolved all through the years. And it's pretty fun reading. Each entry is just a few sentences. It's not real long and tedious, and it lets you know all the people who were in it and what happened each given year and how we got all the way from 1968 to today.
mm.
So I like to invite people to check out our website, theburritobrothers.net.
All right. Sounds good. All right. Well, we appreciate your time and good luck with the album and can't wait to hear the next one.
Oh, cool. Thank you, Joe. It's really been a pleasure talking with you, and I appreciate it very much.
All right. You take care.
You too.